How you doing? Let's talk about jazz improvisation using scales. Oh, using scales and using patterns. Let's talk about that. First, let me just get to patterns because I like to talk about a couple of things that come up over the years. And oftentimes, with some students, people ask me about playing patterns. And some people are, some students are like, they don't want to ever use patterns and learn improvisation. And the main reason why they talk about that or they say that is because they're afraid of sounding like everyone else. And just because of the dawn of, learning jazz and probably or studying jazz in colleges and having some standardized materials, patterns books and things like this. And then so many students are all excuse me, so many students are all practicing the same patterns and learning from them, and they feel in that atmosphere everyone sounds winds up sounding the same because they're all practicing the same material. And I'd say there's nothing farther than the truth than that. Because the fact is, well, let me just compare it to this. If you speak English like I do right now, you understand what I'm saying, and and maybe we are in an environment where we're all speaking English, we're all learning the language of English, but by no means do we all express ourselves the same way, although we learn the same vocabulary, we learn the same speaking patterns, but there will be differences according to our own experiences, according to our own reading habits, or the type of what movies we see, what type of things we enjoy, that by the people we hang out with. This will all influence our language. This will all influence the way we speak. So tell me, how does that supposed to work just because you and 500 other students are learning to play the same patterns? How is it that you somehow wind up all sounding the same? It doesn't work in real life that way with any type of language, and it doesn't work that way with music either. And so it's just basically unfounded this fear that one would all of you sounding the same if you all wind up practicing the same patterns. And so this is just basically, well, just as English is a language, improvisation or certain things about jazz improvisation is about learning the jazz language. And that's exactly what it is. And some students will say, hey, I just want to play free and just let's get the inspiration and find my melody that way. And yeah, they could possibly do that too. But for me, that amounts to learning how, just because you have have learned an alphabet of a foreign language, for instance, you learned the alphabet, and now you think you can write a book just because you've learned the alphabet now, or write a novel, or even just a short story. It doesn't work that way. Even learning a foreign language, you have to learn you have to learn certain idioms, phrases, figures of speech, certain speech patterns in that language in order to get the language of the language, the familiarity and rhythm of that language in order to be able to use it. And once you have your experiences, once you have learned the ground rules for using a certain language, then at some point you do wind up being creative with it. And even if, like, say, you've learned French and another one of your best friends have learned French, and you've gone to the same French class and things like this, and maybe at one point you both have acquired a certain proficiency in the French language, there's no way in the world that the both of you are going to speak French the same way. It's not going to happen that you two are going to express yourselves in French the same way. You won't. It's just not going to happen. And so, again, learning improvisation from patterns, it's not a bad thing. It's not an evil thing. It's not going to turn you into a clone. And so it's just ungrounded fears. Another thing that comes up as well is where I talked about scales. If people who have studied with me privately or either online or in person, they know that I'm not a big fan of using the chord scale theory. Chord scale theory is, major scale, Ionian, dominant scale is we're using Mixolydian for dominant chords, and and so on and so forth. Now I do know this. I mean, I also went through that too. I also learned how to play it, and I've learned to like move away from it, and learned to not like it because the more and more I delved into actually how or actually what improvisers, some of the big cats were playing, like Coltrane, like Cannonball, like Charlie Parker, and whoever you can name, none of them, nearly none of them use these scales in their playing. Very few of them actually use them on any consistent basis. So, it comes to it. If one would learn how to improvise solely on information of using these scales, you would never get to the patterns and licks and melodies that the great jazz masters have played. You would never get there because there's just too many melodies, too many patterns, too many types of phrases that just don't exist solely from these scales. Now, but another reason why I'm not a big fan of scales is that first of all, again, it's like, okay, here's these bunch of scales. Usually a book on improvisation. So here's all these scales and learn all the rules, something like that. And now go improvise. Doesn't work that way. Like again, I'd say just because you know the alphabet doesn't mean that you can write a book. And this works the same way with these chords and scales. I'm a big fan of going back to using melody because all music starts with melody. All chords actually started out as simultaneous melodies that were categorized in certain beats and were categorized and given labels and given names and functions and things like this, and with a whole science was turned into it, where it was actually multiple melodies that were played simultaneously in order just to put some order into the so-called chaos. Now, I look at improvisation as a type of spontaneous composition. And what does a composer do? A composer starts out with a motive, an idea, a little idea, a germ, whatever you want to call it, a motif, and learns how to expand that, learns how to manipulate that, and until it becomes a composition out of that motif. Well, exactly with a scale, I mean, I don't like to start a student off with all 7 notes of a scale. No, I'd say first three, and then we'll move to 5, and we'll see how much damage could actually be done with just 5 notes. And of course, all along the way, not to ignore rhythm, because notes without a rhythm is not much music. But once the student gains an understanding of melody, of how to use them, how to manipulate a melody, and then uh, expanding onto 7 notes or even more, think about the synthetic scales, the symmetric scales, then it's just all icing on the cake. You know, these are all more types of things that one could do more with, but to do it with knowledge of melody, knowledge of using rhythm, knowledge of manipulating melodies. I mean, so um, again, students who've studied with me, they know it takes a long time before we ever start, a long time before we ever start even talking about scales, you know. And but once we get there, the world is a lot easier to deal with. What do you think? Leave your comments down below and let's continue to talk.